Aloha and welcome back for another episode of the Ohana Packers Edition Podcast. Today we continue our pre-draft preview, say that 5 times fast, with tight end position. And today we have Taylor on joining us. So Taylor, thank you for joining us on the show.
Yeah, of course. No problem. Happy to be here.
Okay, I have to ask, how do you pronounce your last name? I was trying to do it the whole time, and I know Mike was going to struggle with it.
It's Czajkowski? That's going to be mine.
That's pretty close. Yeah, Czajkowski. So, yeah, pretty close.
Czajkowski. Okay. I was thinking it was going to be something like Mikowski, just the way it was spelled. So, okay, that makes sense.
I get the Mike Wazowski jokes quite often.
Oh, yeah.
So, Joe, how did you find Taylor?
Well, we were just kind of talking about that before you jumped on. That obviously, like our listeners know, we try to do a week by week thing with the draft positions, and I had been in touch with another gentleman, Jim Wickens, and he's the draft professor and all this other stuff, and he's got like a group chat of 80 plus people, and he goes, well, he just started throwing out names and handles and like, well, ask this one if they want to do this and ask this one if they want to do that. And Taylor was one of the ones that responded. So I was like, you're in.
Yep.
Excellent.
Perfect.
So, Taylor, just give us a little quick spiel for our 36 followers of who you are, what your interest in football, how you got lassoed into Jim's draft professor thread, and what your interests are with the NFL.
Yeah, no, I love football. I love the NFL. It's always been my favorite, especially the NFL draft. Like when I was a kid, my dad would get these like draft books, and I would always go through them and see what players were going from college to the NFL. So, just something I've been doing for like the last 10 years for fun, kind of on the side, and I just post my thoughts on Twitter. Pretty much. And Jim just found me, and then I started, doing some pods and stuff with the draft professors, which is giving me more like, a structural place to go through position by position. So it's kind of the first year I've been doing that. It's been really fun.
It sounds about like everybody else. I kind of was, I didn't read the draft manuals, but I would sit there every draft with a notebook, and I would write down each player that I liked or each player that the Packers took, and then I would go look them up afterwards.
Yep. That's pretty much it. Just a small love of the draft when I was younger. I was like, oh, film's accessible? This is awesome. Now I can watch, these guys get ready to go to the NFL, and kind of, I just post my thoughts on Twitter, and I've been right on some stuff. And I'm like, oh, maybe, a big one for me was Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know you guys are Packers crew, but he was a top 5 wide receiver for me, and he's famously like the 16th wide receiver taken in that class. So just some
we
like that.
We tried not to bring that name up because that was a big miss for the Packers.
Particularly because that was a name a lot of Packers fans wanted. But Taylor, I have to backtrack a second. One thing I appreciate you mentioning is, and it sounds like you're a little younger than Joe and I, but I appreciate that you reference something that is near and dear to Joe and my heart, that we are all from the era where, the internet started to get bigger for draft coverage and all that kind of stuff. But we are all from some point of the era where pre-draft magazines were a part of the reality. And I know everyone does their draft guide online nowadays and all that kind of stuff. But we come from the days where Athlon Sports and all those different magazines do just sports betting now, they used to have their positional breakdowns and all that kind of stuff. So it is a breath of fresh air to hear someone from our era, so to speak, who still can reference following the draft on paper to an extent. That does warm my heart, as opposed to some people who are like, you guys, they sold these in grocery stores? Yes. So that puts a smile on my face to hear that reference.
I remember sitting at gas stations when I worked at them, and that would be what I would do on my downtime when I'd grab whatever one was on the rack, and I would just flip through it. The one that I remember most was because it was the year the Packers took Raji and Clay. So I remember going through the magazines pre-draft as I'm sitting at work. Okay, well, this guy could be there. This Raji guy sounds like he could be something that the Packers could look at.
Yep, absolutely. And Taylor, we apologize that there's going to be moments where Joe and I just pause on each other. And that's going back to Joe joking about my internet before. There are times where we're both kind of like, did he break? Did I break? Did I drop out? So bear with us on that. There's still fluid production. But before we get
And
into
Mike has been out for a couple of weeks, so he's got to get back into the flow of things.
I have to remember how to do a podcast. And I wasn't that great before. But anywho, before we get into our draft covers, just cover a couple.
Hang on, Mike. You're garbling.
So, two quick bits of news. First off, we want to extend our condolences to Rondale Moore's family. Just really shocking to hear of his passing. This, what was it, Thursday or Friday? I am so
Yeah, it was just announced like yesterday.
Yeah. So I'm still so off the whole passing the international date line twice the last 2 weeks. But I remember, Joe and I were fans of Big Ten schools. He's Iowa, I'm Michigan. We remember more in college. As a Michigan fan, we hold him in a certain esteem because he's the guy that pretty much single-handedly beat Ohio State one year for Purdue. So it's just you never get used to hearing this kind of news, but when you see someone who is 25 years old and passes out of nowhere, we still don't know what the details are of his.
No, they found him with a gunshot wound to the head, self-inflicted.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, see, I hadn't even followed up on any of it, and that just makes it even more tragic. And it just goes again to show you never know what any of these guys are dealing with. You don't know the demons that are in their closet or what's behind closed doors, and you just whatever well wishes that you can send his family's way. And just another reminder as usual, check in on your friends and family and just tell people what you think of them, how important they are to you, because you never know these days. So you never know if it could change the mood for them.
And don't stigmatize mental health.
Absolutely.
That's the big problem right now is it's all stigmatized and people are afraid to go get help because they're worried about what the perception is of getting help. So please go out. If you're having issues, go out, talk to somebody. If you're religious, go talk to your religious figure. If you're not, then find a friend, just sit down, have a beer and say, hey, I'm going through this. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Be open with it and don't worry about what everybody else is saying. Do what you need to get the help you need.
Absolutely. Joe pointed out, it's miles better than where we were 5 years ago in terms of mental health, but it's still not anywhere near good enough. So just continue to check in on your friends and family. And if you are, like Joe said, if you are the one who needs help, there's so many online therapy or whatever, but even if you just have to call a close family or a friend member, do it. Don't feel like you have to go it alone. In more Packers-centered news, we haven't had a show since the Rich Bisaccia news broke. The Packers are going to be on the lookout for a new special teams coordinator, and I guess also if they're going to have a new associate head coach. Joe and I have made it very clear how we feel about this, that what they should do is promote Stenovich to that role and then give Stenovich that title, and then that way it allows you to promote him that way and then demote him down to O-line coach and sort of resuscitate the skill increase that you were getting from him as just a position coach. So the Packers, I think they've done anywhere from 4 to 6 interviews at this point.
And I'm not really thrilled with some of the ones that they've been interviewing. When you look at their statistics as past special teams coordinators, they really haven't been great. So I'm not. I think that just goes to show that LaFleur is definitely not interested in the special teams aspect of football.
Yeah, it really does just feed into the whole, what's it called? The Shanahan tree guys just don't care about it that much. And coming from two guys who do not agree with that mode of thinking. But we'll find out. That's one of those that, like Joe said, not thrilled with the name so far, but at the same time, we're going to have to just see where it goes when it goes. And unfortunately, that's the impasse we're at that point. But back to the point of this episode, we don't want to have Taylor sitting here listening to us go on about behind closed door Packers issues. We brought Taylor on to talk tight ends. And it's a position for the Packers. So, Taylor, I don't know how much Joe has told you, but generally how we take this is kind of go into state of the position group with the Packers. Then we go with day 1, 2 prospects, or I guess for the Packers, just day 2, because we don't have a day 1 pick this year. And then who your favorite guys in the class from any part of the class is and who your potential sleepers are. But just going through what the Packers have on roster. So, unfortunately, they lost Tucker Kraft to the ACL tear against Carolina. That was a huge blow to the Packers. Just forget just offense, just their team structure and how they operated within a game flow sense. And they were able to reintegrate Luke Musgrave as the season went, but you really did just see the difference in the things that the different facets of the game that Kraft offers being a plus player at, as a receiving option, route runner, mismatch option, and a blocker, whereas Musgrave is more just like a seam threat downfield kind of guy, has had pretty good hands as a pro. And then it is just, after that, there's just a lot of guys on this roster. You have a John Fitzpatrick who just disintegrated his ankle in the, was it the week? No, it was the playoff game, right, Joe? I'm totally blanking on when he got hurt.
Or was it the first Bears game? Because they went a couple of weeks with only
yeah. It was that's what happens when you play the Bears in the same stadium late in the season. Within a month, you start to get these mixed up. But so Fitzpatrick is likely out at least through the first half of the season. What's it called? And then after that, you're just on a lot of like practice squad only type of guys. So, you're going into the final rookie contract years of Musgrave and Kraft. Kraft is obviously high atop the board for extension options. And I think that's going to happen regardless of where he's at with the ACL recovery. Obviously, they want to see him come back and stuff, but I do think it would behoove the Packers to sign that deal sooner than later, just to sort of keep that number as quote-unquote team-friendly as possible. He's just going to get more expensive the more he proves he is like the guy he was pre-injury and stuff. And it does help that Kraft... Oh, go for it, Joe.
I was just going to say, I wonder if they'll do a Christian Watson-type contract with him, just to see what he's going to be like as a recovery, because obviously you don't want to throw like a 5-year deal on a guy that ends up with a knee like David Bakhtiari.
That is true. That is very true. The one thing that I guess the two things that are different between Watson and Kraft is Kraft has been healthy, relatively healthy, other than this ACL tear. And the second thing is he's a high RAS guy. He's like a 9.6 RAS or something like that when he came out of South Dakota State. But it wasn't that he relied on his elite athleticism to like do the things he did on the field. He was much more of like a technician, body position player, and that used his athleticism to like break big plays after the catch than he did to like get open, if that makes sense. But all that suffice it to say is that I know it's not as much of a red light item as like cornerback, offensive line are for the average fan, but this is a position that, at least in my opinion, fans their eye might twitch if Goot takes one second or third round. But if you just think of what I've said and where the roster is in terms of there's two guys that are like clear NFL talent guys, and they're both in the final year of their contracts. One of them in Musgrave is probably gone no matter what, unless the light just absolutely comes on this year and he totally fulfills his pre-draft, prospect status. I just think that they're going to be looking for 2 to 3 tight ends in the next 2 years, and that's why it behooves them to get a prospect this draft that they really feel good in investing in. And from there, Taylor, I turn it over to you for your day 2 targets. Who are the tight ends that sit atop your board in that range?
with Taylor being an outsider looking at the Packers roster, I would like to get his opinion on what he thinks the Packers tight end room is right now, especially, and I'm going to let you talk, considering the rumor that there was a possibility the Broncos were trying to trade for Musgraves before the Kraft injury. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are, Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Musgrave was the first tight end of the two taken in the 2023 NFL draft, and they had big hopes for him. He was not the first tight end on the board, first tight end for the Packers of the two, right? He was taken ahead of Kraft.
Right.
And Kraft came in and he kind of took that role. And I think there's two reasons for that: what he creates in the run game as a blocker, and what he does after he has the ball in his hand as a receiver, right? Run after the catch, like you saw it in his highlights at South Dakota State. Obviously, it was FCS, but he blew up the combine, like you said, huge RAS score. Like, got him drafted, I think, in the 5th round. So you're looking for tight ends that are complementary of that. So Musgrave has not really been the complementary piece that maybe some thought he would when he went like 40-something overall. So to get someone aligned with Kraft on day 2, you're looking at a tier of options. And there's a couple things about Packers tight end. I did some research on Packers tight ends that have been drafted before, but like Tucker Kraft, for example, 6'5", 254. Luke Musgrave, 6'6", 253. They both ran in the 4.6s. Some other tight ends that have been drafted since the 2020s. Jay Sternberger, 6'4", 251. Josiah DeGuara was kind of the outlier. He's only 6'2", 242. But so you kind of see a pattern here of the Packers wanting really big, strong tight ends. Like, they want the prototypical size for the position, and they're willing to spend for that. So a couple guys on day 2, I think, that fit this are Sam Roush out of Stanford. He's a guy that you're going to hear me talking about quite a bit. I think he was kind of a late riser, someone at the Senior Bowl really is where he blew up. People started to see what he can do. Stanford hasn't had any real spectacular quarterback play over the last couple years. So you have a very talented receiving tight end who can also block with some of the best of them in the class. And again, 6'5", 260 pounds. I think once we get out of next weekend and we have the combine numbers and we know where everyone's at, I think he's a name that you're going to hear pretty firmly set onto day 2, I would think, in the 3rd round. Another guy is probably one of the best college football tight ends this past season, and that's Daquan Wright out of Ole Miss. He helped Ole Miss go to the college football playoff after transferring he went from Cincinnati to Colorado, and then he went to Ole Miss, I believe. But 6'4", 255 pounds. One of the best, he's a really talented receiving tight end. Doesn't offer as much in the blocking game, but it's not for a lack of effort. I mean, he's definitely willing to block, and he's really good in pass protection, and that's kind of an underrated style, and people really think about that when they think about tight ends, but a lot of times they do kick out to those edges, and if the line shifts the other way, then they're blocking one-on-one with an edge rusher, and he handles himself pretty well in those situations. He's a guy that I think has just tremendous upside. Like, I gave him, like a ceiling on my model of just one tier below, like pretty much Kenyon Sadiq, which is the max of what his potential could be. Just because I think he has that prototypical frame, and he's already so good as a pass catcher that I think he's another guy that can play alongside Tucker Kraft and really help that offense, especially move the ball on the ground. So between those two guys, I think those are kind of the area where you're looking into day 2. I think there's some other players that I think will go day 2 that maybe don't necessarily fit as well, and those would be maybe a guy like Max Clare or a guy like Tanner Koziel. These are big-bodied, kind of more receiving threats that don't really hold up as well in the run game. Max Clare has his moments in blocking for sure, but Tanner Koziel is like 6'7", 250-some pounds. So he's a big-bodied, just receiving threat, especially in the red zone. Those are really the tight ends that I could see going on day 2. So definitely Sam Roush from Stanford and Daquan Wright from Ole Miss would be my, day 2 targets for the Packers.
Yeah,
Go Joe.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I watched both of them. They were two of the guys that I was able to get any kind of, kind of backtracking to what we were talking about being old school and all that stuff. It used to be that we could watch all this shit on YouTube. Somebody would break them down, cut ups everywhere. And now you have to like dig deep into the dark web just to be able to find something on these guys. So what I was able to watch, I did watch Roush and I did watch Wright. I think I like Wright a little bit better, but he falls into the Dawson Knox mold where they didn't use him. He didn't have like major, or is that he had what? He had like 600 yards or something like that.
You talking about Daquan Wright?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of the more productive tight ends, I believe.
Okay, well,
But that's
then
not saying a lot because most of these guys, like Sam Roush or even some other guys I'll name, don't really come in with more than 200 or 300 receiving yards in a season.
Right.
Kind of just a position not very underutilized in college football.
Yeah. So Wright, I liked everything about him. I thought he was a little bit more of a stout blocker, and that could just be that they didn't use him as the blocker like Tucker Kraft was being used his first year or two in Green Bay. But I did like what I saw out of him. I said his routes were pretty decent. His hands, he was a good hands catcher. You know, he didn't rely on making the body catches like you see some of these guys do. He looked like he had a little bit more longer speed than quickness, which kind of reminded me of the kid that's with Pittsburgh right now, Dwayne Washington.
Oh, Daryl Washington?
Darnell.
Yeah, where they can move, but they have to. It takes them a little bit to get to that top speed, which you're not expecting your tight end to outrun everybody in the world, but that does kind of hurt with the short passes when you're not able to get that quickness to him. Roush, I agree with everything on him. Good speed, his blocking technique was good. I thought I made this note because I found it a little bit funny that his takeoff was a little weird. He took off like he was going right into pass blocking, and then he took off, where he would do that little funky foot stomp like he was already engaged in a block, and then he would and I just noticed that a few different times. I was like, that's a weird way to start out of your route, but that's just a minor thing. That's not anything major with him. I thought he could be a little bit quicker out of his breaks. He did tend to be a little bit slow out of his route breaks. The one major knock on him, and it drives me nuts with a lot of these guys, is they're more worried about what's coming behind them than what's in front of them. And there was one really long touchdown that he had, and I can't think of the team he was against, but he just kept looking back. And it's like you're losing so much speed looking back like that if you just worry about what's ahead of you, you wouldn't even have to worry what was behind you, because you were ahead of everybody, but you let everybody catch up to you because you kept turning your head backwards, and that would slow you down. Oop, wrong page. I didn't think he was going to be the type of guy that was going to get a lot of run through tackles. This isn't to say he was going to be like a Musgraves where he just goes down on just when a guy breathes on him, but I didn't think he was going to be the type that was going to carry a pile along with him. And then I thought he was a pretty solid hand catcher. So, I mean, both those guys would be worth it to have lined up with Kraft. But it also depends on what LaFleur wants. Does he want another Kraft, or does he want what he had hoped Luke Musgraves was going to be? Was that stretch the seam, not worry about the blocking so much, but stretch the seam, be a mismatch, and all that stuff. But if the Packers walked away with one of these two guys on day 2, I would have no hesitations with it.
Yeah, and I think that last point is where I'm going to go with my talking point here, is that the problem before Kraft got injured is that LaFleur has always stated he wants to operate out of bigger personnel packages. He likes operating out of 12 personnel if possible, condensed formations. Musgrave has one superpower, and that's stretching the seam. And once Kraft got injured, we were harping on it for a few weeks. And then finally, LaFleur was like, okay, he's going to do nothing but run seam routes and run corner routes. And he had a couple, against the Broncos, that was one of the big plays early in the games. He catches that corner route, on the second drive that gains 24 yards or something like that. And he was just using Musgrave more like that. The problem there is, those kind of players, unless you're making him a central focus of your offense, you're only going to that well like 2, maybe 3 times a game. And if he can't block or do other things like turn short catches into decent chunk gains, you really limit the flexibility your offense has when that player is on the field. You kind of start to like tip your hand as to what you're going to do, and or you end up having to force things like Musgrave has to stay into block, and that's always like rolling the dice and stuff. So I do think there is a little more sort of like there would be a little more comfortability for LaFleur's sake if they were to get someone who fit more in the Kraft mold, that is a little bit more of a multifaceted player that, could both play at the same time as Kraft, but also could be the only tight end on the field at the same time. And I think that's the player that they have just been searching for the last 2 years. It's like once Kraft elevated and Musgrave, partly through being the guy he is, Bambi learning how to run kind of thing, and also just not having the dumb shit worst luck with injuries, or just not even injuries, just bodily function issues. They've just been searching for that second tight end for the offense to operate out of 12. They tried to work with Ben Sims for a while. They released him. Fitzpatrick was given the opportunity this season. Fitzpatrick was okay, but he got injured and probably is starting the season on PUP. And so
he's a free agent.
Yeah, that's right. He's a free agent. But, coming off dusting his ankle, I think it'll be pretty easy to bring him back, because not many people are going to be after him, more than likely. But yeah, like I said, this room is thin, and it's what kind of player are you going to be investing in moving forward? I do wonder if they do pick a guy who is, if it came down to these two players, if they were to go more with the higher upside receiving player, just because they're like, we have Kraft who we know can do both, but if we can get a guy who can block and is willing to block, like that, I do think in the pros at tight end, being a willing blocker is more than half the battle, because it's like, as long as you're willing to learn the technique, put in the effort, getting in the way is winning in the NFL as a tight end. Like, I think the average fan needs to understand that a Gronk, Kraft, or why I'm totally blanking on Kittle level blocker is like the unicorn of a blocking tight end, and that the average is like, you just need a wall off guy. And if they can just get that level of blocking as the floor, but someone who can threaten the seam, to not necessarily take the role from Musgrave this year, but starting in 2027 to be the seam threat guy, I do think that that's something that they should be very interested in pursuing out of this position group.
Yeah, I think that's the place I think they'll ultimately go with it, is because they don't necessarily have to have the tight end on the field right now. I don't know what timeline Tucker Kraft is working on, but you at least have Musgrave. You probably are going to get Josh Wiley back, right, as that H-back type, right? So you're going to lose Fitzpatrick, but then you might be able to get a guy like Daquan Wright, who can be, like, I think he's a more pro-ready right now player than Sam Roush, the other guy we just mentioned. So I think you plug and play Daquan Wright, into some different packages while you're waiting on Kraft to come back, and then he's maybe a guy you go because you want someone on the field now. But if you think that Kraft is good recovery wise, him and Musgrave are going to be your two tight ends on the field most of the time this year, then maybe you go after a developmental guy, like another guy that might sneak on today too, Oscar Delp out of Georgia, 6'5", 245 pounds, like a guy who has a lean frame, but he can put on some mass, get to working with Tucker Kraft in the blocking game. And, Oscar Delp could have, pretty high potential as well right there. So it depends on what route you want to go. Do they want a guy that can be on the field this year because they have obviously expectations of being back in the playoffs and making a Super Bowl run? Or do they just get a guy that they can develop behind Musgrave, because when Musgrave probably leaves in free agent next year, then he'll be a fixture in the office. But where do you guys value that from a draft pick perspective? Because is that a day 2 or is that a day 3, conversation?
Go for it, Joe.
Well, I want to address something. I'm gonna throw out a hot take here. Is I don't think Musgrave is back this season. Like I was saying earlier, the rumor was from Denver side of things was they had a deal in place to bring in a tight end, but the deal fell through because the person on roster got hurt and they didn't have a replacement for him. Well, the only one that you can think of at the time of that happening was Tucker Kraft getting hurt, so that meant Luke Musgraves was on the block. So I wonder, and again, this also depends on what Tucker's timeline is. I would have imagined he's pretty close to week 1 that he can be ready. So I strongly think that there's a chance that, especially come draft day and not having the 2 first-round picks and, wanting to collect as much draft capital as they can, I could see them moving Musgraves for even like a 5th-round pick or something like that, just to get something out of him. Now, to kind of answer your question, Taylor, and I said this, and this kind of became controversial on the TikTok clip that I put out. When I schedule these things week by week, I go by the biggest needs. So I put this one just after the cornerback because this is a sneaky need. Like I said, or like we've been talking about, Tucker's coming back from the ACL. Musgraves has not lived up to the draft hype. Then you've got a bunch of, what are they's behind him? Fitzpatrick, is he back? Is he not back? Can he even play again? We don't know. Wiley looked okay in the limited amount of snaps and plays that he had, but can he be relied on as that number 2? And then they had a few guys that they brought in onto the practice squad that maybe, we don't know. They looked all right in college, but and they were rookies this last season, so we don't know what they've done in the NFL. Wiley's been in the league for a few years. I think he's 27.
Yeah, something like that.
So I think you've pretty much reached what he's going to be in the league. So in my view, like I said, tight end is a sneaky need for the Packers. Because again, Tucker's looking like he could be back by week 1, but how much are they going to be able to use him for a while? Because we all know there's always a ramp-up period with guys coming off of that injury. So, I could see them, especially if they have an extra pick or 2, that they could trade back into the 2nd or 3rd round and say, yeah, this guy's, a Wright or Roush or somebody like that is what we're needing. Pull the trigger. And yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Oh no, and I was gonna say, I think what fans need to remember is like, just remember how rough it was for Kraft at times during his rookie season. There was a point where it was like, oh no, another 3rd-round bust for the Packers. The curse is on and stuff. But tight end and D tackle are the 2 positions where rookies suck. Like, they just are not good because the physical,
they're like top tier guys,
right?
Like a Kyle
and even
Pitts
then,
or...
and even then, it's like Vernon Davis. It was like, oh man, did San Fran set a top 10 pick on fire kind of thing and stuff. Like, just the physical elevation of the differential between like playing against other college guys to playing against men at your position kind of thing. That exchange going from college to the pros, it takes time for guys to adjust to that. And so I bring that up to say, like, the Packers might take a guy in the 3rd round. They might take a guy in the 4th or 5th round. I do expect it to go the way Taylor mentioned it, where Kraft is going to get as many snaps as they can give him. Like, that's going to be the thing. I'm with you, Joe. I'm still not sold on what they want to do with Musgrave, because on one hand, I do think LaFleur figured out again that, oh yeah, this is the guy that I was force-feeding targets to the first half of his rookie season by like week 13 this past season. At the same time, from Gutekunst's point of view, it's the whole, is his value ever going to be higher than it is right now? Because he's probably not going to net you more than maybe like a round 6 comp pick, and that's in 2028. So it's like, if someone calls and is like, we'll give you a round 6 now for him, I do wonder if Good will be like, yeah, that's enough for me. Like, that's enough for us. And especially if Kraft, the reports are that Kraft is going to be ready like to return late in training camp kind of thing, and he'll be able to start ramping up at late August. And so, like you said, he won't be able to play all his snaps week 1, but he'll be able to play like most of the snaps he'd expect to play week 1. And so then it's like, okay, do we just roll with Kraft coming back from injury plus whatever rookie we get? And then, therefore, like you said, are we more willing to spend a little higher on a tight end? And of course, this all depends. We say it every year, every position group. It all depends how the draft falls. And this is such a weird class because it's like the positions that normally go early, corner, some of the edge rusher stuff, it's a little eye of the beholder in those two positions. And those are positions where like you expect like a dozen to a dozen and a half guys to go in round 1 between those two positions. And then by the time you get to 52, you're expecting like 20 or so of the picks to be edge and cornerbacks. But it's like, if those positions are weak, what other positions get unnaturally elevated due to the process of elimination and all that kind of stuff? So it's really hard to say what Green Bay will do. But I do agree with Taylor that if either of those two guys are there, I wouldn't bat an eye if Green Bay took them. And I bring all the other stuff up to say, don't be shocked if they don't play more than like 20% of the snaps for the first month of the season, because in LaFleur's offense, the tight end has to do everything. And they're gonna so when they draft one of these guys, they're gonna be like, Crouch, you're gonna block. They're gonna treat him like Kraft his rookie year. You're gonna be the blocker. We might throw you a flat route every like quarter or something like that, but that's it. You're gonna learn on the fly that way. With Wright, it might be like, okay, you're gonna get to do a few more things, but we're still gonna pigeonhole you for a role. And however quickly you pick things up, that's how much more you're gonna be integrated into the offense. So it's a position of need, but fans need to understand that just because it is a position of need doesn't mean that if they take a guy in round 2 or round 3, that guy's going to get 50% of the snaps, because it's just not realistic. It's not going to benefit the team if the guy is not ready to do it, and it's not going to benefit the rookie either, because it's just like we said it about Kraft his rookie year. It's like you got to throw these guys a bone every once. You can't just have them getting chewed out in film session every week, where it's like you got your ass kicked here, you didn't know who you were looking at there, what coverage were they in. You can't just do that to the guys over and over and over again. There has to be some sort of positive reinforcement, and that's why the Packers. It's not. I'm not saying it's the perfect or the absolute right way, but that is why they're like Javon Bullard, you're our slot defender. Lucas, you're going to come on for designated pass rusher snaps. They have assigned roles for all their guys, and that's why they proceed with that route. But all that alphabet soup out of the way, Taylor, we're moving into day 3. Who are the guys that, just if you're the GM of whatever team, you see this guy, you don't like the rest of the board, and you're like, screw it, this is my guy, I'm taking him, I don't care what anyone else says.
Yeah. Okay. So I think actually both of these guys would pair honestly really well with what the Packers have done in the past, and that is take multiple tight ends in the draft. Like you saw it with Musgrave and with Kraft in the same class, and then you've seen it with some of these. Well, they haven't taken another tight end in those other two classes, but those are both day 2 guys. And with the need being such that if they were to move Musgrave for a 6th round pick, you're more than likely going to be drafting 2 tight ends. And so a guy down at the bottom is, near the bottom of my board right now, meaning like a 6th or so round grade. And that's Marlon Klein out of Michigan. So he came to the...
You put a low grade on a Michigan guy, Mike's not going to be happy.
Well, he has a low grade because he hasn't really had the chance to blossom. He came from the Germany kind of path to the NFL. And yeah, 6'6", 250, and he is quick up the seams. Like he's one of those interesting receiver. He's kind of a more Musgrave type, right? Where he's going to be outside. He likes to work outside of the numbers rather than over the middle. So he's kind of unique at tight end, but he's very quick, really good route runner, and he can hold his own blocking too. And he has a really, really lean frame right now. But 2 years in the NFL, like a year or 2 in the NFL, he's going to be bulked up. He's going to be big. He helped run block on the national championship team. He was, in a piece of their offense. He doesn't have a huge production numbers, which is why he's a little bit down my board. But as a day 3 guy, he's got huge upside for sure.
It really looked like it was going to be his season this year. And then, of course, he bolos his ankle in the first game and is just never the same after that point. I think he had like 100 yards and a touchdown in the week 1 game. And then you could just see it. That ankle dogged him the whole rest of the season. This is a guy that Colston Loveland himself said, yeah, I'm going to go top 10, but this guy, Marlon Klein, if we just run in a straight line, he's going to beat me every time. Kind of like, just to give you an idea of what kind of athleticism he has under the hood there. Like you said, through no fault of his own, the quarterback situation was not ideal his final 2 seasons at Michigan. And then injuries just really ate up his senior season. But, like you said, if you're getting him mid to late day 3, it's a good lottery ticket kind of pick. Outside of even the Michigan guy. Yeah, there's a lot of upside there.
Big time development. Like he could be big. He could be good.
I can't answer anything on him. I didn't get a chance to really look at him. I figured with Mike being back and Mike knowing Michigan pretty well that he'd speak on him.
He didn't see the field much against the last time we played Iowa, so that's why.
I didn't even know that you're a Michigan guy when I brought that name. That's just a guy that I identified like 5 guys I think will fit what the Packers do. The 4 that I've named: Roush, Wright, Delp, and then Klein. And then my last one, late day 3 or UDFA. He's actually not even invited to the combine, which I think is crazy to me, and that's Shimon Mateer, tight end out of Arizona State.
Yes.
He is 6'4", 266 pounds. I just mentioned all the size of the Packers tight ends that they've drafted in the past. He fits right in line with that. Good with the ball in his hands, but man, he is an excellent blocker, and I think that's kind of where this class has a lot of those guys that are going to be firmly in the John Fitzpatrick role, right? Like that is what they're going to do, and I think Mateer makes perfect sense for the Packers. He's a guy who has enough upside athletically that you can develop him into a pass-catching weapon out of whether it's inline or the slot. But he is one of those guys that's going to give you all of his effort every time he's blocking. He's a very, very, very underrated player, in my opinion, and I think he's going to go higher. And maybe even you see the combine rises right after this week. Well, he's not at the combine, so he's not going to have that. So he's going to have kind of he's kind of off the radar, but I think there's going to be 1 or 2 NFL teams that really like what he's doing, and I think he fits the Packers really well.
Yeah.
That'll make Perone happy.
I think Mateer will be on like the DJ's guys I like kind of. He'll be on those kind of like, if you're in the weeds with the draft gurus, like he'll be on those kind of boards. And yeah, Taylor, just to kind of go back to what you were saying, Delp and Klein both fit that mold, like you mentioned, where they more fit into the Musgrave mold, where it's like there's more like seam stretching upside with both of them. But at the same time, both are like we said, they're the willing technician blockers. They need to get in an NFL weight room because they are the more like angular, linear athlete builds right now. But they're both guys. Another fellow draft professor, recent addition in Jake Shavink. Shavink has just been banging the table for Delp in particular, but also Klein, as like, he goes, just get me the next angular linear tight end and, we'll figure out how to make it work. And, that's the thing is like everyone rags on Musgrave, but when it's working in this Packers offense, he brings an element that they do not have outside of like what Watson gives them on the table. And I don't think the average fan understands how different it is when that seam threat is coming from your tight end, because it just totally screws up defensive coverages. Because when it's a receiver, it's easier to bring a safety over to shadow over the top and stuff like that. But when it's a tight end who's threatening up the seam, especially from an inline position, it's the one that gives defensive coordinators nightmares, because it's like, how do I want to initiate the coverage? Is there a linebacker I'm shrouding over the top first? Do I bring a safety into the box? And then does that mean I'm hedging both my safeties against this tight end? Or, just because of how the inside out factor of a tight end doing that seem threatening, how it breaks down a defense, that is just such a higher commodity, and is why teams are always willing, like, that's how, what's his face? Falcons tight end. I'm totally Pitts. That's why Pitts went top 10, because it's like, that's your guy who can run routes like a receiver from any position. It's why Colston Loveland went top 10, where everyone's like, he was Michigan's top receiver, but what does that really mean in a Michigan offense kind of thing? It's like, those guys who can run routes like that, that's the unicorn that every NFL offense is trying to lasso. So, not saying that Delp or Klein are gonna be those guys, but they have the potential to swing for the fences and maybe become that guy. And why, as Taylor mentioned, you would take the lottery scratch on those two guys in, like, especially if they fall to round 5 or 6, like, I'll go run the ticket up at that point. You know, we're in that territory.
So I got one that I'd like to bring up because I liked what I saw out of him, and that's Miles Kitselman out of Tennessee. I thought his blocking looked good, his routes looked good, speed is solid, good hands catcher. The one knock on him and it's really weird when they can do this. He can be an active blocker and take a guy to ground, but when it comes to running through contact, he couldn't run through contact. And it's like, wait a minute, you can hold up and blocking, but you can't run a guy over. And that could just be technique. That could just be some of the film that I watched. I don't know what he actually did throughout college because there was only like 2 or 3 games that I watched of him. And I always preference this. I don't do round grades, so I don't know where he would be sitting or where people have him ranked. But I could see that being a type of guy that the Packers could bring in as a a Kraft backup plan. You know, okay, well, we got to kind of back off of Tucker because, you know, maybe the knee's bothering him a little bit, so we're not going to give him as many snaps this game. Well, let's throw Kitselman in there. He can do a little bit of everything. Or if they're playing 2 tight end sets, then he can be that other tight end and all that. So what do you guys think of him?
Yeah, I'm actually so glad that you brought him up because I had a 6th guy on my list of 5, and that was him. I cut him off. But you're right. I mean, he's another guy that fits this mold, right, of this big-bodied tight end that can do a little bit of everything, right? He's 6'5", 255, so right in that kind of wheelhouse of what the Packers like to do from a draft perspective. And you're right, he is willing to block anybody, and yeah, he pretty much gets tackled, you know, first contact, but that's okay. There are guys like that in the league all over the place. Jake Ferguson would be a good example of that. Who I like very much, is a very good tight end, but he was an early day 3 round pick. So I think in that range for Kitselman, I mean, if someone just wants to take a swing on the upside, I think it makes sense here, and I think he could fit in any systems tight end too, but for the Packers, it specifically makes sense.
I found one.
I just couldn't. When you said his name, I was like, I'm not even kidding. I had like 5 guys, and I didn't have time to. I thought about Kitselman, and I was like, I don't have time right now to go through him and get him prepped for the pod. And I was like, that's who I would pick as another late round sleeper. And then of course you said him, so it was perfect.
All right, Joe. Go
ahead.
Go.
Well, I was just going to say, I watched him and I enjoyed what I was seeing. So I was like, yeah, that can be my draft crush at tight end this year.
And since I got to stand up on my soapbox for my Michigan Wolverine, Joe, who is this year's come out of nowhere Iowa Hawkeye tight end that's going to have an 8 to 10 year NFL career?
There are none.
Really?
It might be the first time ever.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
I think the only one that could have was Ostringa, but I think he got like a medical for an extra year. Other than that, no, there are no Iowa tight ends this year.
Yeah, they had a freshman All-American though, so that's,
Vanami.
Yeah, there's one coming.
Unless you do what I think could possibly happen, and Mark Gronowski becomes a tight end in the league. I think that's the only possible tight end from Iowa, unless there's a guy that didn't see any action and will end up as a UDFA, but I don't think there are any this year of that either.
Got it. Yeah,
there are a couple other guys, unless you got somebody that you'd like to talk about, Mike.
No, I'm just kind of bouncing off of you guys.
Okay, well, there are a couple guys like Eli Raridan out of Notre Dame. You know, obviously Notre Dame is another one of those Midwestern schools that produces linemen and tight ends. He could be maybe the second guy off the board, but it's a big drop from, tight end 1 to tight end 2. The only knock that I had on him was he runs weird. He's like hunched over when he runs, and it's like, dude, open up, and you'd probably outrun everybody on the field. But good hands catcher. He's big. I think he's listed at like 6'7" or something like that. He's a willing blocker, but not great. Good stretch the field tight end, and like I said, good hands catcher. Then you got Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt. That could be another one. One that is interesting, but if you go by Mafi, he's got a extensive off the field thing. It's Michael Trigg out of Baylor. He could be, but I think one of his things is he drops. If it hits your hands, you need to finish it. And there were too many times that I watched it hit his hands and it just bounced off or whatever. He's one of those that's not an easy tackle. He can carry the group. Jack Injuries out of Texas could be a UDFA late round guy that looked pretty good. In his blocking, he's got good technique, but he can be overpowered once in a while. Occasional drop there. But if this is one that fits the perfect Packer UDFA, and it would not surprise me one bit if he ended up as a UDFA. Bauer Sharp out of LSU. Speed looks good. Routes are good. He's more of a possession type, not break tackle. Low college production. He was a former quarterback that made the transition to tight end. Well, how many times have we heard that with UDFAs, Mike? Former quarterback becomes tight end. So I think he could be if I had to make a guess on a UDFA in the end of February before we've even hit the combine, he would probably be a Packer UDFA.
Hey, the best Steelers tight end of the past 20 years went to college as a quarterback, and that was Heath Miller, so why not?
Yep. Eli Stowers is a former quarterback as well.
Yeah. That's why I said I think the only way the Hawkeyes are going to have a tight end come out for this draft would be if Gronowski, because if you go by his North Dakota State tape, he might be an all right quarterback. But if you go by strictly his Iowa tape, he's not a quarterback, because his only production really came from the fact that he could run. And he wasn't even really that big of a runner. I mean, speed-wise, he looked like a tight end when he got out on the open field. He wasn't going to outrun everybody, but he was going to run somebody over. He was going to, take a pile with him. So I think he could be somebody that tests at both quarterback and tight end, and come to find out that he'll be a better tight end than he will be a quarterback in the league.
Taylor, one that we don't always do, but any of the consensus top 5 or 10 at the position that you're not really a fan of?
Not really. I think some people have vaulted Kenyon Sadiq maybe a little bit higher than I would have him. I think, getting him into the top 10 range. I know everyone wants to mock, a tight end to the Kansas City Chiefs at 9, but they're not taking him there. I think he'll last on the board longer than people think a little bit. I don't dislike him. It's just I think the position is kind of interesting this year, where we have such a clear number 1, and then between them, you could ask 50 different people that have watched tight ends, and they'll have 10 to 12 different guys that are their second favorite tight end in this class, which I think it really does kind of devalue the position, right? It's like, well, why am I spending a top 10 pick on some, a tight end? Yeah, he has better upside than a lot of the guys that are going to go on day 2 and 3, but is the value of having this upside at tight end versus having this upside at edge rusher, right? That's what you're comparing it to, and a lot of these franchises just simply aren't going to take the big swing on tight end. So I think he falls a little bit lower than maybe some people think. And then as far as some guys that I'm lower on, not really, honestly. I mean, my rankings are pretty not consensus, but they're just jumbled around, and they're not finalized yet, to be honest. We haven't seen any of the athletic testing scores finalized. So once I have that in, I'll kind of go in and have my rankings finalized. But right now, I'm just trying to look at anyone no one I'm really seeing. I think Mel Kiper has Eli Raridan from Notre Dame inside his top 5 tight ends, and I don't personally see that, but I haven't dug back into him yet. So there's
I
some
haven't trusted Mel Kiper's rankings since I was like 10.
exactly. But so you get the point, and it's like, okay, well, so that's a guy, that's a guy maybe that I'm a little lower on. But other than that, now my rankings are pretty consistent. I just think the class as a whole is filled with tight end 2s and tight end 3s. I don't think there's very few, and that's why we talk and we hype up the guys like Oscar Delp and Marlon Klein and these guys that have and Sam Roush with huge upside, right? Like that's what they are right now, because as prospects, as just like looking at them on the field, you see glimpses of it. It's very inconsistent. We know tight end takes a long time to develop, takes a long time to pay off on your picks. So I'm just interested to see how this kind of shakes out, but I do think it ends up pushing the class down. And there's a real run on tight ends come late day 2, early day 3. We might see 10 to 12 tight ends go in a 40 pick range.
And I think you kind of hinted at it, Taylor, where like if you're a team that needs a bona fide tight end 1, you might not find that in this class, or you might have to artificially elevate a Sadiq up your board kind of thing. But with the Packers, and you'll never know until you see the guys play, but all the initial reports are that Kraft expects to be as much of, if not completely himself at, in the coming off this surgery. So the luxury for the Packers is if you draft a guy and he reaches his ceiling of being Jake Ferguson, that's a home run pick for the Packers, because if you're adding a Jake Ferguson impact behind Tucker Kraft, you can't ask for more than that out of this. And that's really what you're looking for. You're looking to complement what Kraft and your other top offensive weapons do, not, be the skeleton key for your offense. So I think that there's layers of nuance to what Green Bay is looking for. I do think, and I don't want to just say they just need bodies. They need more than that, but they're not looking for someone to, this isn't 2023 where it's like, it's the corpse of Jimmy Graham and nothing in the room. Yes, you have questions on what is Kraft going to be coming off surgery. I do think he's going to mostly be himself once he's fully back, but you don't know how long it'll take to be fully back and all that stuff. But it does help that you're looking for complement, not answers not like the answer at the position. And that's a big difference in terms of, what needing to hit on a draft pick equates to at this point for a team moving forward.
I've got one guy that if the Packers took him, I would go insane, that I absolutely would hate the pick, and I don't care what kind of career he would have. It just drove me nuts trying to watch him. Lake McCree out of USC.
Oh, guy I thought he was... Is he not going back to school? I'm sorry. I'm totally I've lost track of who is and isn't. I thought I saw he
could be going back, but I don't know. He was in my little bit of film that I had, and every little thing I watched of him drove me nuts. So if that ended up being, if he's in this year's draft and he gets picked, no.
Yeah, he's declared for the draft.
Oh, okay. I was reading one of those he could come back kind of whatever, and those kind of articles. Yeah, McCree, with him, it's so hard for me to say, there are things he does that I like, and then the other things I'm like, is it him? Is it because USC has had so many of these, this is the next USC quarterbacks in the past 5 years, and then they've all kind of fallen off by the wayside and stuff. But yeah, I'm really curious to see what he comes into as a pro. I don't think he'll be a pack, because I think he's a receiver only at this point. I have not been thrilled with his blocking. But at the same time, if they were to pick him, that would kind of signal, sort of what Taylor was mentioning earlier, it would answer the question of what are they looking for at the position.
Yeah, when I watched him, his arms were flailing all over the place. He wasn't a great blocker and stuff like that. And it drove me nuts trying to watch him. And I was just like, no. So I only watched half a tape, and I was like, I'm done.
He is one of those, it's when I watch him play, he is the definition of this guy was 6'1" until 3 years ago, and he hasn't learned how to run in his new body. That's what he looks like to me. We've all played sports with guys like that where you're like, this guy used to be one of the best athletes in our school, and now he can't tie his shoes and walk at the same time, kind of thing and stuff. And yeah, but Taylor, want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Like Joe said, we appreciate you answering the bat signal and being willing to jump on with us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and talk tight ends. I know it's not the glamour position amongst all the draft spots, but like you said, we're all three of us draftniks. This is a position that I honestly always like following every year. I don't like the class every year, but it's one of those where I like to kind of like see where the class is at on a given season, because I'm kind of like, I want to see how all those guys pan out. Because like, if I'm like, I hate a certain class, but it's like, oh, like two of the guys became really good. What did I not get that made them good pros? And sometimes it's just like, oh, they just went to the perfect offense for them kind of thing. And they're still, all their flaws are still the same flaws. But like, it's like the Travis Kelce. It's like, he still can't block. He's still not really an inline tight end kind of thing. It's just like, he's gone to a team that's like just going to accentuate all of his positives, and that's it kind of thing and stuff. So I am always curious to see like how this position pans out over the course of their rookie contracts and stuff. So yeah, just always really intriguing part of the draft process to me.
Yeah, I love the tight end position. It's great. They're like offensive linemen and wide receivers combined, right? Who doesn't love it? I'll give you guys one draft note before we leave. Okay, you ready for this? I use it on the Draft Professor. This is big. 2010 was the last time there was more tight ends drafted than running backs, okay? At the combine, there's only 21 running backs. There's 27 tight ends at the combine. So there is a likelihood that we see for the first time since 2010 more tight ends taken than running backs. That class, for reference, Rob Gronkowski, Ed Dixon, Toei Moeaki, Jermaine Gresham, Jimmy Graham, Aaron Hernandez, Dennis Pitta. Running backs in that class, Ryan Matthews, CJ Spiller, Javid Best, Dexter McCluster, Toby Gerhart. There's some similarities there between this year and that year in terms of the running back talent and the tight end talent. So look for that draft note at the end of the draft, because I think these should be more tight ends drafted than running backs.
That's a really good point to bring up.
Specific one. The last time the Packers took a tight end in the first round was 2000.
Bubba!
Bubba Franks out of Miami. That was the last time. Not that they're going to be able to the next couple of years, but
I was going to say they have no first, so that won't be in jeopardy.
Just color us shocked if they do something to take a tight end in the first round.
That would be insane.
And just to go back to that 2010 draft class, Packers took one of each that season, and they were both kind of key figures in their Super Bowl run. That's because you took Andrew Corliss, who had to step in and become their tight end 1/2 behind Donald Lee after Jermichael Finley blew his knee out. And then James Starks was the playoff darling when he came off of PUP in like week 16 to power the Packers run game. So again, you just never know how it's going to turn out. And like I said, like that's why tight end is one of those tipping point position groups in every draft class for me, because it's like you can just have a class where it's like, I don't like any of these guys, and then it's like, oh, George Kittle hit kind of thing and stuff, or it's like, oh, I like all these guys, and then all the day 1 and 2 picks sucked out of it. So it's like, okay, like what are we doing wrong here? But again,
and I want to throw in this one thing, because I've been seeing this brought up a lot, and kind of in the Draft Professors group chat, they were kind of talking about it a little bit, how players rise or fall or whatever with the combine, and is it more teams doing it, this or this. The guy that Kawano keeps bringing up, George Kittle, the combine is where people got to see what kind of tight end he was. He didn't get drafted any higher, but they got to see the athletic ability that he could put out there, and that's why he's the tight end he is today, is because he was able to show what he could do at the combine.
Yeah, and I think the inverse of that is, if you think about Jatavian Sanders, he was a guy that was projected to go in the first round, right? Leading up to the combine. Got to the combine, saw some of those skills in the blocking techniques and the drills and in the catches and running, maybe the gauntlet. Those didn't translate, and he ended up being a 4th-round pick. So both sides of the coin there are, for tight ends, it's actually one of the positions that I think the combine does actually, impact some things for draft. So like a lot of times, unless you're a receiver running in the 4.2s or whatever, you're vaulting up the border or corner, right? You're running that fast, you're shooting up the draft boards. But a lot of these other positions, offensive line, really, defensive line, linebacker, even quarterback, running back, like you kind of know where these guys are. Like the big ones that change are wide receiver, corner, and I think tight end is another one as well.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to something else you mentioned earlier, Taylor, where like college teams, there's only like a dozen maybe that understand how to properly use a tight end. And so like there's some of these guys who just have so much untapped potential, but it's like I'm only on the field 5 snaps a game and I'm just standing in the slot. I'm not blocking. I'm not doing anything. I'm just a glorified tight slot receiver kind of thing. So it is one of those, like you said, guys can naturally, like everyone's like, oh, he's just getting unnaturally elevated from the combine. It's like, no, like no one knew he could actually form block and like he had the hip drive and form blocking technique. Like no one knew because he never was asked to do it in college. And now NFL coaches are like, oh, he has the base technique. He's coachable. Like he did everything we asked him to. He understands line checks and defensive front movements and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, like it is a position that can get a guy bumped up a round or two because it's like, yeah, how many teams know that he can do these 4 things that he never put on film in college? So it is a position where guys can get vaulted up the board because like I said, they just never were asked to do it in college. But Taylor, thank you so much again. Where can we find all of your work?
Yeah, you can find my stuff on X down there. That's my handle I put in my name, so you can find me on X, and yeah, that's where I post most of my draft stuff.
Right on. Like I said, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your Sunday, with our funky recording schedule. Joe, take us out. I'm still gaining my marbles back after the trip.
No worries. Just kind of a scheduling note. Bonus episode with me talking to Terrence Parsons Jr. will be released Wednesday. So that's the Wednesday after this episode will come out. Check that out. Give us a like, subscribe, make sure you're turning your notifications and all that on so you know when a new episode drops. We're Ohana_Packers on Twitter, Ohana Packers Edition on Facebook, Instagram. Do go over and follow us on Facebook. We're trying to hit 100 subscribers over there so we can, when we go live, we can start streaming over there. We have a prize pack for people. One of these days, I'm going to go through and do a new video on describing what's in the prize pack. Once we hit 100 subscribers at Facebook, we're going to give away some stuff. Mike, Quano Mike on Twitter and everywhere else. I'm at Iowa Joe on Twitter, and I'm mainly over at Blue Sky, but I pop on Twitter once in a while. Drop us questions, comments, concerns. We have been getting some weird comments and that one of these days I'm going to fucking just do a call out, and my favorite segment's going to come back, and then I'm just going to let it loose on these guys. Check us out on TikTok. We have Aaron doing a lot of TikToks over there, but I have been dropping clips of the episodes over there. Just support us. We're trying to get a little bit bigger in the hemisphere. We are doing some big things. I really appreciate talking to Taylor, talking to everybody else that we've had on here. If you want more of that, be sure to hit us up. The bigger we get, the more people we can get on here to talk with us and go from there and get our stuff out there. It doesn't seem like it's that hard to do this, but it does get to be a pain in the ass because you've got to work around schedules and everything else. Mike's been in the Philippines for the last 2 weeks, so it was kind of hard for him to get on and do anything and work schedules and all that stuff. So please let us know how we're doing. Review, comments, questions, concerns. We do appreciate any comments at all, even though some of them, like I said, have been assholes. But Mike, go Pack Go.
Aloha.